All right, welcome to episode 4 of the Forge Your Strength podcast. I'm super stoked to have my guest here today. He's killing it in this industry, someone I admire, respect, and look up to in a lot of different ways. The man who once said, and if I'm reading this correctly, if he could change only one thing about modern society, it would be to bring back the bidet and install one in every washroom around the globe. I got to say, man, I agree. The one and only Jordan Shallow. Welcome to the show, my man. Where are you calling in from?
In Miami at the moment.
How
It's
you
a hell of
doing?
an a good hell of an intro. It's the old Mark Twain. If you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. So I'm
There you
gonna take your
go.
word. I'm gonna take your word for it.
I love that. You probably got caught in that a couple of times, eh?
Living in the Middle East, those are a staple. It's just in Thailand, and then like they have like very fancy toilets in Southeast Asia. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I was thinking
I've
about
seen it.
that oddly, not that I think about you on the toilet often, but it does percolate in the brain from time to time. I was like, this guy's probably been in more toilets around the world than maybe anyone.
I think yeah, I think about beds often. Like I've probably slept in more beds than most people would in 100 lifetimes. But yeah,
There you
beds,
go.
sinks, anything. I'm a small appliance expert too. Like there's not a washing machine in any language that I can't sort out. There's not a microwave I can't sort out because I've seen it all over.
Do you have the all-in-one converters or do you get one for each country?
Now I got a couple like basically bulletproof
Multis.
ones that you could
Yeah.
take anywhere. Yeah, and that's a sound investment. There's little things when you travel, man, you start to pick up. That's definitely the first thing in the bag, without a doubt.
Love that. Well, for those that don't know, I mean, fuck, if you're following me and you know me, you obviously know Jordan. But as a chiro and a performance coach, he's got his hands in a lot of different pots from the educational space with his company Prescript, helping online coaches or coaches, level up their application to the craft itself. And obviously, as well, heavily involved in the performance and rehab space. So it's something that we could talk about all day with the differences in like biomechanics and hypertrophy and neuroanatomy and how that kind of applies to the craft itself. But something I'd like to get into with this podcast is something I don't feel is paid attention to all that much in our industry. And maybe you can speak to this kind of emotional, human, psychological, mental health side of things. First off, why do you think that's not necessarily something that's paid attention to all that much in strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I mean, I think at low, it's hard to say. My knee jerk reaction is to say at lower levels we're too objective in our pursuits, and at the highest levels subjectivity starts to come back in. Um, I'm just trying to figure out whether or not I think that to be true across the board. But I
Mm.
would say that's kind of my answer. It's like it's such an objective field, whether like the tools we use to measure, I think a lot of times contain the progress we can actually make, which is like really like a backwards way of thinking about it. But I do think that like, you know, at least from a performance standpoint, what we really want to measure, what we really want to improve can't be effectively measured. So we use objectivity to kind of like feed our egos and be like, well, he jumped a little bit higher, or I don't know, he ran a little bit faster in a straight line. It's like, okay, that's really probably doesn't have anything to do with much when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to like the field of play. So, a lot of it I think is, we're trying to be scientific. We're trying to be overly objective. We're trying to justify, we're trying to be right. I think that's a part of it. And at the end of the day, it's about winning. And I think a lot of times we're so clouded by being right that we forget that being right isn't the goal, that winning is the goal.
Mm.
And I think if you look at those people who have historically been able to show up and win, they probably have like a less objective approach than normal. I think when you go down like the statistical analysis of, breaking down force velocity curves and all this, and which is great. Like, don't get me wrong, I can
Mm-hmm.
nerd out on the science all day, but it's like you're setting a ceiling into what's manageable, and what's measured. So I think that might be part of it. Is like, we have to answer to higher ups that cut our checks, and the only thing they really understand is definitive numbers, or they want out of us is definitive numbers. But really, at the end of the day, is they want wins on the board, right? So they want more points, they want more touchdowns, or whatever your sport is. So I think probably a big part of it that people don't pay attention to. It's like I have indicators for performance that have nothing to do with performance itself, but have everything to do with performance. And they're
Mm.
all just like, pattern recognition KPIs of personalities and excitability and preparedness that aren't really measurable. But when you see them enough, you're like, okay, I recognize what I'm seeing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's something I definitely want to come back to. Have you, by the way, have you ever, just before we go on, have you ever referred to yourself as Dr. Shallow or insisted that somebody call you Dr. Shallow?
No, my sister's Dr. Shallow, man. Like I have no qualms with what I do for a living.
There you
My
go.
sister's the real doctor. I'm just a prick on the internet.
Obviously, I asked that facetiously because the truth is, anyone who knows anything about you, knows that you carry yourself with a certain level of passion, care, and thought into everything that you do. And it's not just obvious. It's not just obvious. It's palpable. It's something that you can feel, whether you've had a conversation in an Instagram DM or a podcast like this. So, I appreciate that about you. And I think if we could summarize that in one word, it would be integrity, which I think has a relationship to this sort of more emotional side of things, whether we want to characterize it as objective or subjective. What does it mean to you, the word integrity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's something I guess I don't really think about it too often. Reliability, reproducibility, action, it's all of those things at once. Like I like to know how people are thinking by what they're doing. And so in that wantingness, that's how I act. I act on behalf of how I feel. So that's how people know. So yeah, I mean, just showing up, I think, is half the battle in that one. I don't know. I think my parents might have a big part to do with it. If it would piss my mom off, I probably wouldn't do it. Then that's a good guardrail to have. Yeah, I don't know. I think the word like humility gets thrown around maybe too often, but maybe it fits in this case. Like, I think respect is a big part of it. Like I got into this at a time where like I massively respected the people who came before me, and I think that's served me super well. Because sometimes when you realize your parents have mistakes and your parents are actually just like a bunch of old kids that have kids and are trying to like figure out how to make Christmas work with no money and shit like that, you're like, oh, okay. But if you respect them long enough, then you shoot to emulate something that might not have actually been true. Like I grew up, and like to bring this more like strength and conditioning, like I admired Charles. I would fight someone if they said Charles Poliquin was wrong, and I'd never met the man in my life. But he got results, right? He had like 200 plus Olympians under his belt. And then when you get older and you realize like, maybe Charles wasn't perfect, right? But I never thought anything less than that until I was like, I don't know, 25. And I'm like, man, this guy like reads research in French and he learns different languages to find different research articles. And he like works for 3 weeks a month or 3 weeks a month and then 3 months and then takes a month off or something crazy like that. And then you start to see some of the stuff like through clearer eyes. But at that time, you've already like established a work ethic that's based off of something that you've respected, rather than like going looking for holes in people and being like, oh, this guy's full of shit. This guy's full of shit. This guy's full of shit. It's like, if you can like be like, oh, this guy's the man, I need to be at that level. And then, there's still some people that I look up to that operate with integrity, that when you get to know them, you realize that they're the opposite. Like they are that and more. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a straight answer. I don't know if I've ever actually been asked that question before, but I think the reliability piece is big. Like, what you're going to get and you get it. If I say I'm going to do something, you do it. Yeah. There's, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you touched on a couple of things there that I think are interesting as it pertains to maybe not just the word integrity, but the word humility that you used, in that the more they get used, as powerful as they are in the English language, as much weight as they carry in a potential conversation or analysis of the topic, they almost get watered down in their repetitive use. So I think the relationship maybe we have with those words changes as well. And there's a bit of a paradox for that word integrity for me, because you touched on both an interpretation of that word from the perspective of respect from the peers, or at least aspiring to be like the peers that you respect. So it seems like a bit more of like an outward thought process. Like, how do I get to be the people that I deem respectful, or that I hope that they have respect for me? Whereas a lot of times this integrity, I think the other end of that spectrum, and maybe this is a bit of that kind of cognitive dissonance and why it's difficult to define these words, is that there's certainly a subjective, introspective piece that is highly correlated to the outcome of that definition as a whole. Like, how do you relate to integrity? What does it mean to you to kind of have self-respect within that.
Yeah, I mean, the people I want to be known by, no one's ever heard of. That's like, I mean, the people who, and I'm lucky, like, some people living in the social media age, people are starting to hear about like sort of like the modern day Mount Rushmores and strength and conditioning. And I've been lucky to like work with a handful of them. But like, back in the day, you'd have to really be pretty nose deep in books to know who like, Verkhoshansky was, or you'd have to know who Charlie Francis or Charles Poliquin. Like you'd have to kind of be really in the, in some forum somewhere reading some Russian training log or, but so it's like that was what kind of set me on the path. And it's like that's where you kind of want to be. Like Mike Boyle started following me on Instagram like a year ago, and I was like, what the like, I think I've made it, right? Like this guy's been
Probably
leading NHL
100,000
players.
Mike Boyles in the yellow pages.
Right. Yeah. But there's like, if you're in the know, like that'd be someone that if you ask some kid at a gym somewhere who like does, follow some Instagram program or something, like who Mike Boyle is, he's like, I don't know, my English teacher is like, okay, all right. Like, so for me, it's like, yeah, that, if that's something like a metric of integrity, it's like that, though, that's who I'm after. Like there's a purity to it that I think I'm trying to pass on into like a new generation of like, whether that's depth of subject matter or whether that's just like actual boots on the ground, like cutting your teeth, going about like the conventional model, like I did the school route and I did like, the 10,000 hours or whatever the fuck that whole moniker is. Like I still stay on a gym floor. I still consult. I still stay close to the problem. I don't like the idea of passive work. Like we're lucky enough to work on the internet, and this is somewhat considered work for us in today. But it's like, yeah, I think it's just kind of like an homage to the way it was been done. And like obviously stuff like this is like new age and new generation, but there's an underlying like ethic that got passed down from future generations that I think is the only way to kind of move forward, is to kind of keep that essence of it alive.
Yeah, so largely like an appreciation for where we've been to maybe forge either a better path forward, or at least, keep some of the integrity, the honesty of what was in what we do.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? Like and I hate how everything comes back to social media, but it's for better or worse, it's made this possible. So I guess it's better in this case. But like it can be a self-serving cesspool. So how do you provide value? It's like, well, how did you provide value 20 years ago, right? Like you took someone from a current state to a desired state quickly. It's like, well, I could do that on social media. But most people just kind of use it to line their pockets, which is like, hey, that's your prerogative. You got to sleep at night, you got to settle that debt. But yeah, I think it's just not falling to like the very easy outs that platforms like that have kind of allowed you to take. But if you can, it's actually like, I always imagine what would, if Instagram was around in early Charles, like Poliquin days, or Charlie Francis days, or input any, like even maybe a little bit more mainstream, like imagine Louis Simmons 20 years ago on Instagram. That'd be insane. Like West Side Barbell and all those guys. So yeah, I mean it's a powerful tool, and you just try and like wield it in a way that you see is really like the most beneficial for the industry, like across the board and across time.
It's cool because I think that's a great little exercise to do, is like picture what they would have said, what they would have done with a tool like social media. And like in some ways it's like you could see one of them sitting down, you could see Louis sitting down talking about the technical side of it, talking about the different aspects of a lift, talking about the biomechanics of it, talking about the different progressions and regressions of a squat, a box squat, whatever it is. But there's something inherently that relates to integrity the way he would have done it relative to how you see a lot of it today, I think, at least.
Yeah, well, especially, I mean, Louis is like so immersive. Like if you've ever like, and not to be just like, not to come off the wrong way, but like, man, you've never met someone on quite a spectrum or quite an intersection of spectrums like Louis. Like I remember sitting, fuck, dude, we rolled up it was March 2017, 18. We roll up to Columbus, and he pulls up his fucking like S-Class Mercedes, all the windows down. It's snowing sideways. By the time he left the gym, the back of seat of his car was like under 3 feet of snow, like inside the car. But he would walk in, and I was with like a couple of friends of mine, and he would ask us like, "Oh, do you compete? You compete? You compete? What are your numbers? Blah blah blah." Like, "Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Whatever." And then like gets to a friend of mine, Steffi Cohen, and gets to her and goes like, "What are your numbers?" No idea who she is. No idea. She's like, "Oh, like whatever. I don't know." Whatever she said, like her numbers were high 400 squat or 500 squat and 535 pull or something like that, and the mid 2 bench. And she's like, "How much?" He's like, "How much you weigh?" Like, "I compete at like I don't know, like 123 or something like that." And she's like, "That's impossible." He's like, "That's impossible. Those are world records." And she's like, "Yeah, no, I know.
I'm aware.
They're mine." And he's like, "Well, the previous world record was this, and then a previous world record, and back in 1784, blah 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 blah." So and so was like, "Did you say 1784?" That everybody just goes.
Yeah.
Like he just has the whole list of like, and then at WPC Worlds in Portland, Oregon, just on her second attempt. I was like, this guy is
He's
just
got a Rolodex
an
going, man.
encyclopedia. And it's like, that type of stuff, you can't duplicate that type of passion, man. Like that, like that's something that you'll never see in Louis Simmons. You'll never see someone like Louis Simmons again in our lifetime, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth from these eyes, you're doing a hell of a job carrying that torch, my man. It's coming through in everything that you do.
I got any more tattoos? Louis got me beat on the tattoos.
There you go. So I think, speaking of which, I think whether it's through social media or through your education platform, I think when people see Jordan Shallow, especially nowadays, they see someone who's hitting home run after home run, someone who doesn't miss, someone who's delivering a very refined product, as it were. But with the understanding and acknowledgement that obviously many of our successes are either a result of, or maybe even a precursor to, some inevitable adversity, some inevitable psychological difficulty, challenge, whatever it is. Is there a period of time or perhaps a moment that stands out more for you than some of the rest of them? Because obviously we've all got a lot of them, as one that was characterized by self-doubt or even just a swing and a miss or whatever it was?
There's so many. We do so many dumb things all the time. It's just, I don't know. If you're happy with where you're at, like you can't be upset with how you got there. So it's like, I don't know. Like I was thinking back, little projects that cost us, a lot of money based off of what we make. And it's like, yeah, we miss all the time. Like, we've recorded entire courses, entire video libraries that have never seen the light of day. We've earned a bunch of money just doing stuff we thought would work and never released it, or it never worked. It's like, none jump off the page is necessarily like catastrophic. You just kind of brush yourself off and keep going. It's, yeah, I don't know. Maybe because like my business partners and I, but like my original business partner, Jordan, like we met in first year chiropractic college. Oh, Jesus, I don't know, 2011, 2010. I've known him for 12, 13 years. And it's like, we're just two scared, broke kids that didn't know what side of the bed to piss on, man. So like, it's everything has been building from that. So I don't think anything, like we could probably look back in early days of like graduating school, and we talk about this often. And I think it's helpful to kind of calibrate how far we've come. But like, we'd work 16-hour days, 7 days a week for like years on end. And we just didn't know that it was different. Like we didn't know, like our podcast. I mean, we talked about this before we hit record. Like, we started our podcast in 2016. And back then, like we didn't have enough money for like a hosting service to like hit an upload button and then it send it to. So I was able to like spend a couple nights up doing YouTube tutorials and how to figure out how to post the podcast through this thing called FeedBurner, which like I had to get a URL and a domain name, register the DNS, and then have this like blog posting WordPress website that I would upload this link to, and then take that link into this Google FeedBurner process. It was like it was like a 45-minute process just to get the podcast up. And for what? We had 7 downloads our first month. Like probably 2 was my mom and then someone at her work or something like that. So it's just, I don't know. We have like so many instances of just like really just stupidity. Like other people would have been rightfully so entitled to quit, and no one would have blamed it. But we're just like, I don't know. I guess if we just keep doing this long enough, we'll sort it out. And there's been a lot, like, maybe not so much like financial stuff. We went through like a corporate buyout. We had business partners, and then we've seen them come and go, and legal battles, and employment issues and contracts and all that. So it's like, I don't know. We would never look at them as, we don't ever even consider the negatives on them, and maybe we should, to help better inform our decisions. But like, it's we only just draw like the positives from it and keep going. Like, that's kind of like our MO, is we just keep our feet moving, and we barely slow down. Sometimes, we purposely now take a moment every now and then to like kind of sit back and take a look around and see how far we've come, but it's rare. And I think that's helpful, because there's no laurels to rest on. We have a pretty clear idea of where we want to go, and we're not there yet, and maybe we'll stop when we get there.
There you go. That's exactly it. Yeah. Lots to kind of contemplate on, that we can get on in a bit. But is Feedburner still around? Is that still a thing?
Oh, dude, I have no idea. I'm so lucky to like, and it was tough because like in the business development side, like there becomes times where there becomes a time where that's not where my time is best suited, right? Like there's a point where the business grows where it's like, I shouldn't be spending hours uploading a podcast, right? I should just like say the things, and then other people should take it from there. But I have such a, I don't know, I have such like a grunt work mentality that it's like, if I can do it, I'll do it. I don't know, half my friends are working 12-hour shifts in a factory somewhere in Windsor, putting fucking doors on a Chrysler Pacifica or something like that. Like, those motherfuckers are working hard. I can sit at a keyboard and like write another thing, or upload a feed, whatever the fuck it is. So it's like, that's honestly the difficult part, is like, from a business perspective, understanding where your time is most valuable, and like having the discipline to actually like, hey, do you want this thing to be successful? Like, you're responsible for feeding, and not like solely responsible. I don't want to like put myself on some pedestal, but like, what the processes you've built as a business are responsible for putting food on the table for like a non-trivial amount of people. So like, don't be just like an egotist that wants to push a rock up the hill. Like, do your fucking job, and that's not getting in the back end and doing a bunch of shit just to prove that you can do it and stay up late and all that. So that was a tough thing to break, and just understanding that like work has evolved over the years from, doing the front end and the back end and everything in between, to like understanding like where my value is, and understanding that like I have like good people around me to sort the stuff that they're better at than I am, which is like, most of the people with most of the shit are better at the things that I need to do than I am, which is like, I think that's a sign of a good business.
Yeah, man, that's really, really well said. Is the last couple of guests that I've had on have all been athletes that have just kind of finished their careers, and that are moving on to their professional careers now outside of athletics. So I wonder, from your perspective, as someone who's both competed in powerlifting at a high level and is now obviously coaching at a high level, did you take anything from your competitive days as a powerlifter into the work that you're doing now, outside of the obvious technical overlaps?
Yeah, I think empathy is big. Like, when you compete at a high level, it's really hard to reach someone who's competing at a high level when you haven't. Right? Like, it lands a little bit differently. Like, compassion and empathy, I think, are like, compassion could probably just be chalked up to sympathy and be like, oh, I know, or that must be hard, rather than I know how you feel. So it's like, to have a few stories of like, played hockey at like an okay level, but then got into powerlifting and was like, pretty good back when powerlifting wasn't what it was today. God, these kids are insane right now. So it's, when I work with people, and powerlifting is unique because it's the essence of powerlifting is in strength and conditioning all over, right? So like, I'm not the best football player, I can't empathize with that, but when I work with football players, I'm not asking them to play football, I'm asking them to like squat and bench and deadlift. So it's like, if I could unrack anything that they can unrack and do it, it's like, there's no reason that you can't do this. I can do it. And then there's also just like the mental side of just being like, training when you're tired, or training when you don't feel like it, or, training when you're hurt, or not training when you're hurt. Like, if you've walked a mile in their shoes, your life becomes much easier. And like, you become a much better communicator, because you know, there's some like there's nonverbals that are associated with each one of those use cases that if you don't have those miles behind you, you're never gonna actually connect with someone on a meaningful level.
Yeah, really well said. Again, is that so? You said you played goalie in hockey, and then you competed in powerlifting. Now, as a coach, a lot of those are very kind of singular elements. There's a necessary you and you alone kind of element to it. Was that something you tended to gravitate towards too in a lot of your life, or was it just those happen to overlap?
Yeah, I would say that's more of like a personality trait.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I would stand outside on the sidewalk of nightclubs while everyone else went in. I would stand facing the complete opposite direction in a net while everyone else is looking at you. And it's an accountability thing. If things go right, it's my fault. And if things go wrong, it's my fault. And it's just like, and it's the same in business. Like, people have kind of come to me more on the business side in the last couple of years, just because we've been around for a bit. And it's like business is way more about taking responsibility than taking credit. And a lot of people want to take the credit. It's like, man, there's not a lot to cling to some days. But you got to be the first one to throw your hand up and eat shit or jump on the grenade. So I think it's been a nice transition coming out of sports where you're just kind of exposed. Like, you drop the weight, you fall over, the puck goes past you. Like, there's no really like, oh, well, the defense or the spotters. It's like, no, those are sports that don't have any time or any place for excuses. So it's nice. I think that's been like a good mental preparation. And I haven't really thought about it until right now, because it's like when things go wrong or when there's like hard conversations that need to be had, or, insert any, it makes it easier for me to just throw my hand up and be like, okay, what needs to get done? Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll do it. I'll say it, whatever it takes. Because you just you don't give a shit. If you're focused on the end goal, it's like everything just becomes easy.
One of the things that's so representative of Prescript seems to be this kind of like team mentality. So did you ever find it difficult in sharing that responsibility and not saying, okay, I get it that the buck stops here, but maybe here is no longer just me, it's us?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult now. I mean, because we're so lucky in the way we've come across our entire team, like where we touch all corners of the globe. We come from so many different backgrounds, like, from like conventional education, like me and Jay, to like, the unconventional practical application side, like a couple of the smartest people I've ever met never took a biomechanics course in their life, but they were like, Killian was like a carpenter and he can apply everything he learned in carpentry to like the stuff that we do in training. Or, James McIntosh worked, he was an international arms dealer and an anti-rhino poaching unit tactical medic, killing people in Ghana who were trying to kill rhinoceros. Like, so it's, or we have like, Stu is probably like the preeminent barbell coach in Canada right now. Total, like one of his clients has Canada's biggest total. Yeah, and then we have James Thayer, who's like this down home dude from Kansas who's like just gets it. And then we have Baxter, who's a physio, who's like from Canada but went to school in England and then lives in Bali. So it's just like, yeah, I mean, the way everyone has come in, and like Bagheera is like has his master's, and then our nutrition arm has like Dr. Dwayne Jackson, who was like a 10-year professor at the University of Western School of Medicine, who like did his his PhD and postdoc at Yale. So it's like we came across everyone so, I hate to use the word organically, but like just so naturally. It was just such a fit that it's like you want to share that with them. Like, you don't want to keep it all under one roof, and like, and vice versa. Like, we all have this kind of, like, we all have each other's backs, if anything, whether it's some slight on the internet or whether it's, someone needs a place to live, whatever it is, someone needs to get beat up. Like, it's, it was so unlike, it's not like we've never once put out a job posting that says now hiring, but we have a staff of like 30 people.
That's it, man. You guys just attract it for sure. There's no doubt about that. Take me back to your early days as a strength coach, because obviously, as much as you're very self-aware and you talk about things like empathy in an industry that either otherwise lacks the conversation or just a relationship with that concept as a whole, Was there ever like a wow, I shit the bed moment there in your early days as a strength coach where you're like, this is something I can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a bad one from a clinical standpoint. My first patient in practice was a dude named Dan Green. Dan is like a pretty prominent American
Familiar with
powerlifter. It
his
was like,
work, yeah.
you're familiar with his work, yeah. So I I practice out of his gym, like just out of school. I remember I graduated December 14th, 2015, and on the 15th, I was on my hands and knees laying down baseboard and laminate clicked flooring in my office in the back of his gym. And maybe like a year after that, he was like complaining of like forearm pain. And like Dan was like pretty smart dude, like usually knew what was wrong with him. It's like, yeah, like have an issue with my forearms. Like, all right, I mean, guess kind of makes sense. Like you're holding on to like 700-800 pounds a few times a week. And so it ended up not being like necessarily a muscle of his forearm, but actually his bicep, and he tore it.
Mm.
So that was like a big matzo ball because I was like, oh, he's got like a forearm strain. And it was like, nah, he was probably like partially strained or partially tore his bicep tendon until he fully ruptured it, pulling like 829 2 weeks out from a meet. Um, so yeah, that was like a big fuck up where you're like, yeah, I'm gonna eat that, and I'll never misdiagnose a torn bicep again in my life because your friend just like fucking rips his arm off the bone and can't compete and all that shit. So that was like a pretty bad fuck up where you're just like, ooh, all right, yep, back to the drawing board, got it.
I think when there's a lot on the line like that, it probably makes it more difficult to accept it in the moment or just move on from it. So it's probably a bit of a scar. It stays with you, I would imagine.
I think every lesson worth learning is a hard lesson.
Yeah, well said. I think if I think back, similarly, maybe not as significant an outcome, but the first ever pro athlete I had worked with in a one-on-one scenario. To that point, it was group sessions where you can kind of hide amongst a couple of other coaches, and it was a certain athlete who couldn't make his group time, and it was like, all right, he's coming at the end of the day, and you're the fucking rookie, so you're gonna take him through his workout. Here it is on the board. And I remember it was some form of banded sprints out on the track. So I take this guy down there, like high second round pick in the NHL, like trying to make the jump from the AHL to the NHL at this point. And like I'm fucking nervous, obviously, right? Like it's the first time I'm working one-on-one with the guy. So I get down there, I strap the band around his waist, do a big warm-up, whatever, get the band around his waist. And first sprint, I'm holding onto the band behind him. And this is still supposed to be part of the warm-up. So I'm like, all right, so far we're all right. Takes off, band fucking snaps and recoils, shoots me in the face. The second band recoils and like hits him in the back, and he's like, goes down hard. And I'm like, I have no idea what to do, right? I have no idea what to do now. So I just take him back up to the gym, fuck around through some shit that I thought that I knew what I was doing at the time. And just as we sat down, I'm like, all right, in between sets, we're kind of back to the workout now. I feel like I've fucked up everything I can fuck up right now. So it's going to be smooth sailing for the rest of the session. And he sits down in between sets and says like, hey, can you toss me my water bottle? He had just filled it up, put a little electrolyte mix in there. I grab the ball, I toss it to him. I under toss it by 1.5 feet, and it explodes on the floor in front of him. And that at that moment, it's just like, okay, that there's a consequence to me either having been too nervous or not prepared or whatever the fuck it was. But for me, it was really easy in that moment to be like, this is as bad as it gets. Like it cannot get worse than this. But I would imagine there's a significant difference between that and like you fucking tore your bicep potentially because of a decision I did or didn't make.
Yeah, I think that in both cases are similar in the sense that the best way to get over it is to call it by name.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Just when the bottle smashes at the kid and his electrolytes fly up in his face, or when the bicep tears and you get a text that says, "Hey, does this look torn?" Just like owning it is so useful. Like it's like, oh yeah, well I fucked up because that's all. I mean, Dan would never say that it was my fault. Bless him for that, but it's like, yeah, that I think, although slightly different in outcome, I think really similar in the way that you would approach it. Is just like,
for sure,
just jump on the grenade, man. It's way easier. Don't try and avoid it. Like you fucked up, we all do it, and just move on. You're not going to do it again. And so when you start like trying to come up with excuses, that's when you stop learning.
Yeah, it speaks to a theme far greater than the strength and conditioning, I would say. And a lot of that, I guess, has to do with somewhat preparation, but also the ability to kind of adapt on the fly. So I think in coaching, there's a lot of this kind of talk about pivoting on the fly, particularly in the work that we do on the gym floor amongst a group of athletes, maybe more so with a group than just an individual, although that's not necessarily mutually exclusive. As much as there's a plan kind of built around to weather these storms that may come, there's still very much an art to kind of being able to change on the go and kind of make these decisions on the fly. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to communication strategies, both outward and inward, how you communicate to the athlete, the recognition that you have of how they're communicating with you, and sort of how that plays into the decisions you make. What do you look for in terms of body language or communication that suggests, like, we got to make a change today with either this guy or this group?
Yeah, I mean, we usually work in groups, and I usually work with like football players, and they usually get paid very well. They're young, and they usually like all like each other, and they usually all like music. Basically, like honestly, one of my biggest metrics that I've leaned on over the years in working with like NFL players is like, if they're not like dancing in between sets, they got a lot to dance about, man. Like their life's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So you see a guy coming in and he's not like, you put on a playlist that, they usually enjoy, and they're not like, honestly, if they're not dancing in between sets, like something's up, and I'm just going to make a move off of that. Everything else could like look fine, but it's like they're not in the headspace, whether it's like you drag them aside, depending on the type of guy, or you give them a movement that they're good at, or you just, tell them like, hey, you good? Like, you want to pack it in? And like, yeah, I'm like going through it or whatever. And it's like, all right, man, like, I'll see you tomorrow. But like, it's as simple as something like that, just pattern recognition over the years. It's just like, they're comparing the Maybach to the Ferrari F8, and there's the whatever they get up to. It's so crazy, the lives that they live. Not to get, don't get it twisted, like they work really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something as simple as paying attention to like an intangible like that you're not going to see if you're staring at a clipboard or a Tendo unit, or a Nord board or some bullshit like that. It's like, this kid's got a lot to dance about and he's not dancing. You should probably pay attention to that.
It can be as simple as that, man. Recognition, any like aberration from the norm, and in speech pattern and kind of energy and mood and body language. And yeah, I appreciate that. It reminds me of speaking of athletes that maybe they have a lot to dance about, but they've got it pretty good too. There was this one athlete I was working with once. At the time he was, in the KHL, I think, trying to work his way back to the NHL, and you could tell that he was like really frustrated. And sometimes this is maybe where it's not always just about recognition, but there's more to that conversation. And you could tell he was frustrated about something. He's kind of quiet. Usually he's pretty upbeat, a guy that cracks a lot of jokes. And there was a moment where we were kind of off in the corner. So I asked him, I'm like, hey man, everything good? Like, how was yesterday? How you feeling? Whatever. He's like, I'm just fucking stressed. Like, I'm so stressed. I'm like, oh, what do you got? What do you got today? What's going on later today? And he's like, well, I got this workout. And I'm like, and then he just kind of paused. And I said, yeah, okay, well, you're already here, so we're almost done. It's all good. What's next? And he's like, I got to buy a hat. And I'm like, okay.
Ooh,
and then I was like, what else? And he's like, actually, that's it. That's it. And then he was like, fucking fine, the rest of the workout. And I'm like, are you for real? That's what it was? Of course I didn't, you didn't show that. You're just like, oh, fuck, man. I'm glad I could help there.
That's a hockey player. That's unique.
Through and through.
Football players just buy all the hats, so they don't have like that stress. They just buy all. I'm just gonna buy all of them.
There you go.
Oh man, yeah. It speaks a bit, like, I think sensitivity is a word that gets misused a lot. Like, I would say that I think it's a skill that comes from knowing your surroundings. So like awareness, sensitivity is a byproduct of awareness, and like, so what I mean by that, when most people hear the word sensitivity, they think like, oh, I'm gonna put on Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and grab like a bottle of Merlot and sit back and have a good cry or something like that. It's like, well, that could mean that, but I don't think I'm sensitive in that way. I would say I'm probably like whatever the opposite of that is. But I think sensitivity in the way like an alarm system or like a radar would be sensitive, right? Like, but the only way you can know, if Buddy what's his bucket literally is having a tough day, having to go to lids after hockey practice, is like, if you understand, like, that's the baseline that you're going to establish. And that's if you don't establish that behavioral baseline, and it's like,
Right.
please don't do it with some sort of test. Like, I can't, people talking about like personality assessments. It's
Have
like,
a
are
fucking
you, again,
conversation. Like,
but it's the objectifying, the subjective. And it's just like, you're missing the point. And then it comes down to like, is something like that intangible teachable? Like, can you actually teach that? Can you teach consciousness and self-awareness? It's like, I think you can put people in situations where they beat their head against the wall enough times and realize that there's a wall there, and then they might become like an ounce more self-aware. But it's like, that's because it starts with the coach, right? Like, if you're not a self-aware person, you can't create a reproducible schematic of your environment enough so that when aberrations start to appear in that environment, you can start to flag them, right? And this is true. Like, I mean, I do this walking down the street. Like, I know the type of neighborhood I live in. I know like the cars that are usually there. I know when a car sticks out. I know the type of people that are there. I know the languages that are spoken. I know languages that stick out, right? So it's just like, it starts from just like really understanding your environment, really understanding their baseline behaviors, because like there's nothing worse, dude. And I'm pretty heavily involved in the NFL combine process. And it's it's a metric circle jerk. It's a strength coach's wet dream. And it's so fucking stupid the way they go. And it's like, look, I understand. Yeah, we got to run fast. You run a good 40, man, you'll run your way to $1 million. Like, you'll be all right. And you got to jump and the broad jump and like the bench press or whatever those 9 drills are. But it's like, there's no worse a day, because I often get called in to do medical evaluations, and it's like, you play college ball. I can do my medical evaluation on Google for these kids.
yeah.
It's like, all right, you tore your ACL 2 years ago, whatever, you're redshirt junior, whatever it is. And it's like that. My whole evaluation is like, how do I establish the beginning of a baseline? Like, and again, personality, almost, if you say the word personality, people almost just tie that into like a personality assessment. It's like, not that. Like, how do you establish a baseline relationship with someone to go off of, right? To like build some sort of trust.
You don't have your
And it's like,
Myers-Briggs clipboard with you.
so dumb, man. Like, especially in that case of the NCAA going in, like they're going to be poked and prodded and analyzed and questioned. Like, the combine is no joke. When you like go through the process, like, if you got a kid that thinks on drugs, his ass is up at 3:30 in the morning. You got a kid with like a history of beating the shit out of a teammate. They're going to grill him with questions, like, and rightfully so, man. You're turning over like, a couple $1 million to these 18-year-old kids. You want to make sure you get your money's worth. So that's definitely the idea of being sensitive should be a very high priority, but understanding what goes into that, like, you need to have self-awareness to create a reproducible schematic of the environment that you have with the athletes you're working with, so you can understand when something is off, right? They're looking down rather than looking up. They look left instead of right. They don't look you in the eye. They don't answer questions the same way. Like, there's and yeah, like, and some guys normal is others guys off the rails. And that's another thing. Like, I've worked with some linebackers that have been a little bit punch drunk, and like, there's a floating normal because he's been hitting the head somewhere. One guy, like, I had to keep him on edge because like, or I was always on edge around him because like he has been like, he's had concussion issues like a lot. And thank God I did, because I was in the gym one day and he just snapped on me and we almost ended up throwing hands on the gym floor. And if I wasn't ready, man, he was 6'4", like 280. I would have had a no good, very bad day. So like, I know enough to be like, hey, buddy's like a little bit stressed, a little bit on edge, and he's playing with less than a full deck. And it's like, so I always keep a wide berth around him. And one day, man, he just fucking thought I said something, or I forget what the beef was. I was talking to someone and he just got frustrated. He didn't understand. And like, dude, he took 2 steps towards me and like, I grabbed a pole off of one of the prowler sleds that just pulls out. And I was just like ready to beat him with it. And he kind of like came to. He's like, oh, sorry, man. I was like, don't worry. I know. I knew that was in there. But I'm not saying like that's going to be an everyday thing, but it has its benefits of being able to establish, all right, like how does this guy move? How does this guy operate?
That's that
Yeah, it's not
sensitivity
going to
piece. Do you find that
everything.
that's
It's everything.
do you find that that's something that coaching has maybe enhanced your ability to kind of dial into this sensitivity to different environments, or was it just your maturity as a person, recognition of these concepts that elevated your coaching in that sense?
I honestly think teaching has probably been the more the stronger curator of this experience for me, because like coaching is teaching to a certain degree, but it's like I can tell competency by physical. I can tell it in real time. Do they understand what I'm telling them? Are they doing the thing the way I want them to do it? Yes. Okay, great. If not, I can intervene. But like, if I'm presenting at a conference or I'm teaching, in a lecture hall or hosting a certification course, I have like 30 or 40 people and sometimes it's like 1,500, 2,000 people. And you have to be aware of what's landing, what's not. You have to accept that certain people just aren't going to get it and where that line is. And you got to accept that certain people are bored and they already know this. But I feel like for me, like actual, like getting in front of a room, public speaking, teaching, that's probably heightened it more than anything else. Not to say, the reps and the sets on the gym floor from a coaching perspective doesn't bring that out. But I think because I have such a, you watch people move in a gym that just live in gyms.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's different. Like we move different. Like the way you pick up plates, the way you grab barbells, the way you load and unload barbells, the way you can just like, put clips on and off of a bar. Like I can unload a bar like a NASCAR pit crew changes tires. Like it's nothing, right? So there's a certain level of like comfort that comes with being in a gym setting that just makes that relationship and that sensitivity easier. Cause like I know that environment, but like the heightened state of like being on a stage in a room you've never been, and it's like not really, I mean, I'm more comfortable with it now because I've been doing it for so long, but like that to me is really, and I challenge this for coaches, like, when we do coaches education, like I'll have some of our coaches teach a module on something. Cause it's like, look, you need to be able to explain it to people that either know the shit or don't know the shit, but it's like, you got to get your sound bites down. Right. And you got to be able to pick up when it's not landing. Cause it's like, just as I need to teach something to a kid, it's like, I need to understand, like I need to be a direct conduit into that kid's brain. Cause I don't have the time to, fuck around with 10 different things. I need to change the exercise if it's too complex, but I only know if it's too complex if I teach it as adequately as that kid can be taught it, and then parse out whether or not he's physically competent enough to perform the movement I'm trying to get him to perform. Because sometimes if it's my incompetence and I need to pick a lesser movement because I didn't cue it or teach it or set it up properly, then that kid's missing out as a byproduct. So I mean, to circle back and kind of answer your question more directly, it's like I think the teaching side is really big, and I think coaches got to understand that that's what they are, and I think they need to look at that as a separate skill. Like, really refine your thought process, really refine your delivery, and know how to adapt the core message to land in different places. Because that's ultimately, like, that's what makes it better to coach, right? Like, you make a better decision faster than the next guy, you'll be a better coach.
That's exactly it. Well, man, this has been super insightful. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for all your personal and professional platforms, because they, as we said, come across as extremely, they're full of integrity and they're very honest. And again, on a personal note, it was my relationship with you, Prescript, the guys at Prescript, was a big part of me leaving a position where, I had working with the best athletes in the world and starting a business myself. So again, on a personal note, I appreciate you and I appreciate everything you're doing.
Fucking rice, man. Awesome. Happy for you. Pumped to see you in person. Hopefully next time I travel through. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I honestly didn't even like understand the time until I was like, oh wow, yeah. All right, cool. I guess that sounds good. I could do this all day, man. So
there you go.
Thank you so much.
All right, brother.
Cheers.